Good evening. I'm Dan Rundy, and I'm president of SID-Washington. Thank you for being with us tonight. Tonight, we're honoring Andrew Natsios, former USAID administrator and U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan. We have some special tribute speakers, including Congresswoman Nita Lowey and President of URC Barbara Turner. And I want to thank the SID-Washington Board, and especially Mark Viso, the chair of the Program Planning Committee, along with Byron Radcliffe, who was chair of the fundraising committee. I must also thank the SID-Washington staff, especially Jordana Frater and Manoli Strecker, along with a whole host of volunteers and associates at SID-Washington. I'd also like to thank our 49 institutional member sponsors for your support. Please go to page 12 of the program for the full list. And this night would not have been possible without the support of all of them. I do need your silence for me to just go through the list of the platinum and gold level sponsors. And I'd ask you to hold your applause until I've listed them all. So let me repeat that. I'll ask you to hold your applause until I've listed them all. So at the platinum level, we have Apt Associates, AECOM, Chemonics, Chevron, and DAI. At the gold level, we have Cardno, Creative Associates, EDC, FHI 360, Plan International USA, and Tetra Tech. I've got a couple of housekeeping issues. The first is I'd like to announce that SID-Washington will be holding its annual conference on June the 5th at the Convention Center. The 2012 conference will look at the future of development, politics, policies, and the challenges ahead. Ken Lanza of USAID has kindly agreed to help chair the planning committee for this event. I'm going to raffle 2 tickets for the annual conference if I can get silence. I don't know if I'm going to have success with that, but I'm going to try. Okay. 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 One winner is Sean Carroll of USAID, and the other is Paul Moore of Nathan Associates. Congratulations. Finally, as many of you know, Joe Foyer will be stepping down from his position as executive director at the end of this year. He has served in this capacity for 4 years, making very significant contributions to the organization and its continued success. Joe, where are you? Joe? Let's see, where's Joe Foyer? Hey, Joe. I'd ask everyone to join me in a round of applause for Joe Foyer. Thank him for his service. Thank you, Joe. Okay, I'm going to ask now to enjoy a brief tribute video from the 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush. Please roll the tape.
Good evening. It's my great pleasure to join you in honoring Andrew Natsios tonight. In the 3 decades I've known him, Andrew has consistently fought for doing the right thing and the good thing. I'm sure hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives have been saved because of Andrew's passionate leadership and unswerving commitment to public service. I asked him to join my administration as the director of the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance at USAID because of his dedication to one of my key objectives, to make kinder the face of the nation and gentler the face of the world. Throughout his years in public life, Andrew has carried with him a profound understanding that prosperity has a purpose. A stable world order requires us to do something about the disparities between the prosperous and poor worlds. From Sudan to North Korea to the South Asian tsunami, he's been tireless in his efforts to restore hope and dignity to victims of man-made and natural disasters. He's also more frugal than any Yankee I know, and hence a superlative steward of taxpayer resources. His record in Massachusetts testifies to this, as does his leadership of USAID. Even now, he continues to speak out on behalf of the voiceless and the poor, advocating smart foreign assistance that shores up U.S. interests around the world, reinforcing rather than compromising our core values as a nation. Congratulations, Andrew. Your work is not yet done.
I'm going to ask Ambassador Ezekiel Lal-Gotkoth to come up to read a brief statement from President Salva Kiir of the country of South Sudan. Ambassador. And then I'm going to leave you to your dinners, and then I'll come back in a little while. Ambassador.
Good evening. I was still eating. Excuse me. I would like to read a statement from President Salva Kiir Mayardit. He would like to be here today because Andrew Natsios is his friend, and he valued Andrew Natsios. The contribution of Andrew Natsios in South Sudan is recognized by many, not only him, the President of the Republic, but even myself, because he's a true friend to all of us in South Sudan. This is what President Salva Kiir would say tonight if he's here. Dear Andrew, allow me to take this opportunity to convey to you my sincerest congratulations on the occasion of being honored by the Society for International Development, Washington, D.C. chapter, for your distinguished career in international public service. I'm proud to call you my friend, as you have been a true friend to the people of South Sudan for more than 2 decades. Your work on behalf of the welfare of all people of Sudan, South Sudan, and North has been a hallmark of your career in international affairs. In fact, whether negotiating access for humanitarian aid or helping to secure the comprehensive peace agreement ending Africa's longest civil war, or trying to find a lasting political settlement for Darfur, you have been unrelentingly in your commitment to ending conflict in Sudan. Through your interventions as USAID Administrator and U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan, we have known how deeply the American people supported the people of South Sudan in their aspiration for peace, democracy, and responsible statehood. And so many of our people's lives have been saved through the assistance that USAID under your leadership provided. Without the role you played in U.S. foreign policy towards Sudan, as well as your honest and wise counsel to us throughout the course of our struggle, we still might not have achieved our destiny to be fully free. So on behalf of the people of South Sudan, we give thanks to the United States for sending us friends such as you, and we hope that you will visit us again soon. You will always be a brother of South Sudan. Please accept the assurances of my highest consideration on this distinguished occasion. Sincerely yours, General Salva Kiir Mayardit, the President of the Republic of South Sudan.
We have 2 really excellent tribute speakers tonight for our honoree. We have Barbara Turner and Congresswoman Nita Lowey. I'm going to introduce both of them, and then I'm going to cede the floor to first Barbara Turner and then Congresswoman Lowey, and then I'll come back up to present the award, and then we'll hand the floor over to Andrew Natsios. Barbara Turner became president of the International Development Company, URC, in 2005, but most of you know her from her 30 years of very distinguished service at USAID. She was Deputy Assistant Administrator in a number of bureaus, the last one being what was commonly known as PPC, as well as also being Deputy Assistant Administrator at the Global Bureau and the E&E Bureau. We also have Congresswoman Nita Lowey, who represents the district where I grew up, actually, of all things, and she's currently serving her 12th term in Congress and was first elected to the House in 1988. She's widely known in Washington as an extremely effective, committed legislator with a substantial record. Congresswoman Lowy serves as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, among other roles, serves as ranking Democrat of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, and in that role worked very closely with our honoree tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over first to Barbara and then to Congresswoman Nita Lowy. Barbara.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Congressman Lowy, for joining us. It's an honor for all of us in the international development field, including Andrew, but the rest of us as well, for you to honor us with your presence. It's also nice to see so many old friends in one room. Thank you, SID, for putting on this event. And thank you, SID, for honoring each year a leader in international development. Because as we all know, development is not an easy business to be in, especially in these tight budget days in every country. It's a personal honor for me to be selected for this assignment, to honor Andrew Natsios. I'm certain I was chosen because of my many, and as Dan emphasized, many, many years as a career civil servant at USAID. And for those many years I've served in Washington, I truly believe that the administrator of USAID has one of the toughest jobs in Washington, probably rivaled only by the president. It's just simply mind-boggling to think of the many clients that you have, the many audiences you have, and how many wildly diverging views there are of what should be done, or even if anything should be done about international development, even within the same political party. Very few people in this town understand the foreign assistance budget, although there are a couple of you in the room tonight, so I probably have to make some exceptions. How it's developed, how it's managed, what incredible results are gotten with a very small amount of investment, and how hard it is to really implement under some of the most difficult conditions. Yet everyone has a view about it. Managing international development agenda, even within the Beltway, is a pretty incredible task. And then the hard work starts after that when you get into the field and try to make a difference with the investments in what are often difficult social, political, and economic settings. We owe a great deal of debt, I think, as international development specialists, to those who take on this leadership task, and especially to those who take it on with the passion, tenacity, and deep personal commitment that Andrew Natsios has done. First time I met Andrew was in late 1991. I had actually taken a leave of absence from USAID for a couple of years and was returning and was drafted to work on the newly independent states and with the collapse of the former Soviet Union. You may not recall this, it's been a while, but in those days there were food and economic crisis in the former Soviet Union, and Time magazine featured pictures of people in food lines in Russia and other places in the region. Andrew was at USAID not as the administrator, but as the director of the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. He had mounted a food aid and disaster relief effort, particularly in the Urals and in Central Asia. And although USAID had never worked in this region, had no field offices, had very few people that spoke Russian, he had gathered an enormous amount of information. Actually, at one rather high-level briefing in Langley, someone from the CIA leaned over and said to me that Andrew and his OFDA team knew more about what was happening in those regions of the world than they did. If you have ever briefed Andrew on any issue, you'll know what the CIA guy was talking about. He's quite thorough in his questioning and in his knowledge. What impressed me tremendously was that this situation was not just your typical hurricane or famine response, as tough as those are to deal with, but we had practiced those for many years. This was an entirely new and complex agenda in a region of the world where USAID was not. It also may not be a surprise that there was not full support from all corners of the State Department or the cold warriors that remained around town in various buildings on what was the right posture of the US in the former Soviet Union. I'm not going to go into the sordid details here, although it might be fun. But let's say I witnessed more than one shouting match as Andrew moved ahead to mount an effort to show US support to these new governments that were forming. Andrew's a student of Greek philosophy, as you know, but there is one Greek philosopher, I think he missed class that day, had a saying that silence is safer than speech. Clearly, Andrew missed that lesson. And thank goodness, because he stood up, he has always stood up, from the first day that I saw him certainly, for what he thought was right. But that's not all he did. As I worked then on the new independent states for many years following that, getting over that disaster, I realized that Andrew's tenacity and his vigor to show support early on, to make the right investments with the right groups, made a huge, huge difference in our longer-term relationships, in our ability to talk frankly to people, in our ability to push for reform. What I found most innovative about his efforts, even though he's well known for his disaster response and ability to deal quickly and intelligently with those issues, was his ability to pull together not just that quick response, but to couple it with a much bigger vision, laying the groundwork for the future development and democracy building in that region. And I've seen that happen time and again in the Indonesia tsunami relief and in many other programs. He brought to the disaster assistance programs a very unique link with development that I believe is a lesson we have all learned and stays with us to this day. When Andrew returned to USAID in 2001 as the administrator, from his very first day, he was immediately faced with some tough situations, as I believe all of the administrators are, things that plague every administrator, but I'm not sure that's what they thought they went to college for. First, of course, was the Mexico City policy. Even before he was confirmed, the administration took the now ritual of reversing the Mexico City policy, or I think they were unreversing the Mexico City policy, but you guys all know what I mean. Andrew faced a pretty demoralized group of folks at USAID because they didn't really know how he was going to deal with this and how far he was going to take this reversal. I was particularly impressed about how he handled this from the very beginning. He embraced the staff, he talked to the staff, he got the staff's views. He went on to be very supportive of reproductive health and family planning issues, and even as HIV/AIDS emerged, he was one of the people who came up and said we have to have procurement of condoms as a part of the HIV/AIDS program and prevention as a critical piece. Again, there were many, many, many objections around town and in some high levels to that approach, but he didn't give up. He pushed the issue at some risk to his own career, but he won that issue, at least for the initial PEPFAR program. Immediately after confirmation, Andrew flew off to visit a USAID mission, as he was wont to do. And it happened to be, I think he left on September 9th of 2001, and on September 11th of 2001, he was out of the United States, unable to get back for quite some period of time. There were no other, if I recall, there were not very many political appointees in yet, because normally the administrator is appointed first. But he immediately signaled to the senior career staff that he trusted us, that he had confidence in us to make decisions, to act quickly. He knew that you, especially in emergency situations, can't wait for the bureaucracy and the clearances and the memos and the yada yadas. You have to really move. And he communicated with us on the phone. He gave us a lot of authority and a lot of delegation. And I believe that was really the early signal again that he trusted the staff and he was going to make us a part of his team and have him be a part of our team. And I think that is something also that stands out in his tenure, certainly for me as a career staff. I frequently saw him speak out about the great work of the USAID staff and what they were going through in places like Sudan and Afghanistan and Iraq and the Indonesia tsunami. As well as defending the people who work in every day on the agricultural development program without a lot of glamour and excitement. He worked tirelessly to rejuvenate that program and bring back that staff and that greatness to USAID. He put a great deal of effort, of personal effort, into fighting for more USAID staff, for revitalization of agriculture, to get us back the greatness that we had at the Green Revolution. When staff suggested we try something new to get real private investment into the agency, the Global Development Agenda, GDA, the Great Global Development Authority, he gave a great deal of support to us to put that together. And although it was an initiative of his administration and one that he really helped to make, he continuously, even up to a few months ago, I heard him making a speech, gave all of the credit to the USAID staff for the ideas and the implementation of the activity. We, at the staff level, of course, know that putting something that complex and somewhat sensitive about linking private sector money, especially big private sector companies with development, was controversial at the time and required real leadership to make happen. Now, I won't tell you all was roses. We staff did have to sit through quite a few lectures because Andrew was usually more knowledgeable and well-read on the issues than some of us. And when you were briefing Andrew, the term 1,000 questions, Andrew invented it. He was, and I believe still is, a big fan of James Wilson's book on bureaucracy. It's not a bestseller, actually, even among bureaucrats. But actually, Andrew can quote almost every line in it, I think. And he is one of the few leaders you will find who do recognize and lives the importance of action over rhetoric. He truly understands and promotes that there's a complexity of getting implementation right. And if you don't get implementation right, you're not going to realize the rhetoric. Today, I continually hear people around the world, and many people here in town, talk about his article on the clash of the titans and the regulation of bureaucracy, how the bureaucracy regulation conflicts with those in the fields trying to get things done, and how we need an overhaul in thinking about that, of how we do international development work. It's a 75-page, I think, single-spaced report. I helped him edit, so I can tell you that it is fairly tedious to get through, and yet constantly I'm getting people that send it to me and say, this is a must-read. You've got to take a look at this. And yet, while he was strengthening the staff, the accounting systems of USAID, the information systems of USAID, he was at the very same time engaging on the most important of international issues. Andrew fought for recognition of the injustices in Darfur and South Sudan long, long before it was popular. He discovered it even before George Clooney in Hollywood. He put himself in great personal danger going into Darfur in numerous occasions, even to the point that the security people would cringe whenever he said he was going. He worked closely with the South Sudan leaders, even when it wasn't quite appropriate from a politically correct point of view in Washington to do. But it wasn't an initiative. For over a decade, he has never, ever given up on promoting the importance of an American and international role in Darfur and South Sudan. Winston Churchill said, "A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty." Andrew, thank you for being an optimist and keeping us and the world focused on the opportunities in development.
What a pleasure it is for me to join with so many friends in saluting you, Andrew. And after those beautiful remarks, there's very little more to be said, but I'll say them anyway. Good evening to all. It is really a pleasure to be back here tonight with the Society for International Development. The work that each of you does every day to strengthen democracy, promote development, and protect human rights is essential to U.S. national security interests. And I want to thank you for those efforts. One of this organization's great strengths is its ability to bring people together from across the political spectrum who share an understanding of the importance of international development, and I am so delighted to have the privilege of paying tribute to Andrew Natsios, our honoree. Andrew actually became the USAID administrator in 2001, the same year that I became the ranking member on the State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee. And after the September 11th terrorist attacks, we both had to grapple with the question of what role U.S. development efforts should play in the New World Order that emerged from that fateful day. We both concluded that our efforts overseas not only help to provide a better life to the world's poorest people, but are also critical to U.S. national security interests. Now, Andrew and I have not always seen eye to eye. I'm sure that he remembers some oversight hearings with some tough questions and policy disagreements, but I've always appreciated and admired his unwavering commitment to development. His vision for USAID and the reforms he implemented have made the agency stronger and more effective today. Let me say a few words about three of Andrew's areas of focus. One of Andrew's first initiatives at USAID was to realign its bureaus and revamp internal systems to make the agency more relevant for today's world and better able to interface with other parts of the federal government and more effective in its management. Andrew understood that regardless of how good our intentions are, we need an agile and responsive agency in order to achieve our development goals. One example of the legacy in this regard is the creation of the Office of Military Affairs, which has fostered better cooperation between our agencies that deal with crisis and conflict situations, and has kept our development professionals involved when their expertise is required. Andrew's vision can be seen in current initiatives, whether it is the recognition of the importance of effective interagency cooperation in Secretary Clinton's quadrennial diplomacy and development review, or the focus on transparency and efficiency in Administrative Shah's USAID Forward initiative. The seeds that you planted started the agency on the path toward greater accountability and effectiveness. Another major initiative that began under Andrew's watch is the Global Development Alliance, through which public-private partnerships are formed that can both achieve USAID's development goals and meet the business needs of a private partner. Even in the best of times, USAID's budget accounts for less than 1% of our overall spending. Should we say that again? It seems I say that over and over again these days. Oh, and we have to keep saying it over and over again. Less than 1% of our overall spending. Andrew realized that these limited resources could be effectively leveraged by seeking partnerships on projects that had private sector business potential. Through the GDA, USAID is able to increase its impact by bringing in additional funds, and the business community is able to contribute to the creation of new markets and economic opportunity. As proof of its tremendous success, in the last 10 years, USAID has worked with over 1,700 partners on over $9 billion in development projects. And that work would not have been possible without Andrew's leadership. And third, Andrew understood the importance of making USAID's work more visible, and he set his sights on branding and improving USAID's public image in the countries where we work. This has been a particular interest of mine, and I recall very well a trip to Morocco where I toured a beautiful school that had been built by USAID. There was no sign. No one knew who did it. We didn't get any credit. However, to say that this project had been funded by the American government, I insisted, with Andrew's help, that one be erected. So at least if we're providing all this wonderful help throughout the world, we can get some love and a little bit of appreciation for it. We cannot hope to win the battle for hearts and minds if we do not communicate the good work that we do. And Andrew really understood this, and he was behind the phrase, quote, "from the American people," that is now a part of the USAID logo. The small change had such enormous impact, and it strengthens our ongoing development efforts throughout the world by clearly communicating that it is the generous spirit and the American people supporting these USAID programs. These initiatives reveal a clear vision of how Andrew believed the United States should conduct its development work. An agile, efficient agency able to work effectively within the U.S. government, with the private sector, with the faith community, and with the people it aims to help. Andrew's work to implement this vision has left a lasting legacy at the agency, one that is being continued today. Finally, I also want to highlight Andrew's dedication to Sudan, which has been mentioned, and to bringing peace and accountability to a country that has seen so much violence over the last 4 decades. Throughout his time as the USAID administrator, and later as the Bush administration's special envoy to Sudan, Andrew worked tirelessly to find a way to end the conflict and promote prosperity and stability. While there is still so much to do, Andrew has played a significant role in the progress that has been made so far, and he deserves recognition for pushing the Bush administration to be actively involved in efforts to rein in the regime in Khartoum, stop the bloodshed in Darfur and elsewhere, and bring about the conditions that led to the successful referendum and creation of the new nation of South Sudan. Congratulations, Andrew. Andrew, this is an honor that is so well deserved. You have made a lasting impression on the development world. You've played an important role in strengthening U.S. efforts overseas, protecting our national interests. It has been a pleasure for me to work with you on these critical issues, and I hope that you will continue these efforts for many, many years to come. Congratulations.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lowy. So both Congresswoman Lowy and Bush 41 said that Andrew's work is not done. So Andrew, I promise this was not a valedictory. And so we have, you have other jobs to do, and so looking forward to many years of work ahead of you. Please come up, as well as Joe Foyer. We're going to present the award, and then Andrew, I know you have some remarks for us. So Joe, if you could join me, please. Okay, we just hold this and then get in the middle of the two of us, and we'll get a picture. Andrew, the floor is yours. Thanks very much.
Is there a light here? Well, I have an unfortunate announcement to make. The man you're honoring tonight, he was unable to come, so they sent me instead. Elizabeth to be serious, my wife of many years gently urged me this evening not to make any incendiary remarks. And I promised her I would restrain myself and stick to the text, which she repeated to me several times. Whenever I ignore her advice, I always get into trouble. But of course, all you know, I enjoy getting into trouble. Thank you for your many very kind words. I am honored to be honored this evening. Thank you so much, Dan, Joe, Mark, for your efforts and for those of the team in making this event such a special night for me and for my family. It's great to be with you all and to see so many friends and former colleagues from USAID here this evening. I also do want to pay tribute to Peter McPherson, who's here this evening, who convinced me to join USAID just before the election in 1988. He was Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. I remember seeing him in that beautiful old Federalist office you had. And it was a week before the election. The polls were pretty clear as to who was going to win. You never know, of course. Don't count the votes until the election's over. But he said, you need to come and join AID. And I said, why? And he convinced me, and things have changed since then, Peter. But if you hadn't been there to be a mentor all these years, I probably wouldn't be standing here right now. I do want to thank my old friend Barbara Turner of so many years for her kind remarks and for her friendship, and Congresswoman Nita Lowey for her kind remarks. I learned when I was Secretary of Administration Finance, the penultimate job before AID, that if you trust the career people, they will avoid you stepping in doo-doo or landmines, which would be worse. But more importantly, if you tell them what your agenda is clearly, even if they disagree with you, they will carry it out as good civil servants. And when I took over the big dig with 1 day's notice, the 8 senior career civil servants, many of them had 30, 35 years experience, they came with me. And they urged me, they said, take us with you and we'll take over the place in 1 day. And they did. If I had not taken them, I would never have got control of the big dig. And I learned a very important lesson. Trust is reciprocal. If you trust them, they trust you, it works much better. I learned that a long time ago, and it has served me very well in public service. I also want to thank Ezekiel for the wonderful letter that Salva, my good friend Salva Kiir, sent this evening. 6 months ago, I had the privilege of attending the birth of a new nation and of witnessing the Declaration of Independence of the Republic of South Sudan. It was a moment I could not have imagined the first time I visited Sudan 22 years ago, in fact, with Bill Garvelink, who's here this evening, during a famine that had just killed 250,000 Southerners, when North and South were mortal enemies engaged in a protracted struggle that would create the tragic distinction of Africa's longest-running civil war. And yet, despite the bitter history, on July 9th, I witnessed the proclamation of independence of the new republic in front of the 2 leaders of the North and the South, 15 heads of state, the Crown Prince of Norway, Ban Ki-moon, and tens of thousands of Southerners. The ceremony was 7 hours long. It was about 110 degrees by my reckoning. While this moment was above all a testament to the sacrifice of the people of South Sudan, it was also made possible in no small measure by the sustained commitment of the American people and on their behalf of our humanitarian and development program. Their friendship and shared experience between the Americans and the Southern Sudanese ultimately enabled the United States to use an opening in humanitarian access, which Roger Winter helped negotiate, who's here this evening, in the Nuba Mountains to begin a peace process that would end the war. The State Department negotiated it, but the beginning of it was actually a humanitarian access agreement that AID negotiated to allow self-determination for the people of the South. Tonight I want to reflect on what I believed about U.S. foreign assistance when I became U.S. Administrator in 2001, and what I still believe now after a decade of profound change. Those of you who know me won't be surprised to hear that there are certain things I don't agree with the current direction of U.S. foreign assistance, from the ongoing subordination of aid programs to defense and diplomacy as instruments instead of being an equal partner. I think actually we need the biggest D needs to be development, given the challenges we face. To the misplaced hope, and I helped negotiate the Paris Declaration, that direct budget support to foreign governments will improve aid effectiveness, when I think it will damage it if it's carried too far and may damage public support for U.S. foreign aid. What I'd like to take on each of these topics tonight, what concerns me is our failure to convince the American people as to why U.S. engagement through development and humanitarian assistance programs matters to them. I hear from my conservative friends that we can't afford foreign assistance, that it is this time of debt crisis and economic hardship, discretionary spending on feel-good programs around the world can't be justified. How can we claim to solve poverty, they say, or hunger overseas when we can't deal with them here at home? On the other hand, from my more liberal friends, I hear wildly unrealistic claims that we're going to eradicate poverty in the next generation, achieve the Millennium Development Goals, which were never meant to be applied on a country-by-country basis if you read the initial documents. Admirable though this may be, the great majority of Americans would not cite saving the world as a priority for the United States, especially when faced with pressing challenges here at home. In my earlier career, I served for 12 years as a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives and to know something about how elected officials think. How can we expect members of Congress to support spending on programs abroad when they are simultaneously making steep cuts to what appeared to be those same programs here in America? We know they're not the same programs, but some people think they look the same. I also know something of what it's like to make difficult budget decisions from my time as Secretary of Administration and Finance in Massachusetts. I believe government should be no larger than necessary to achieve its core purposes for its citizens. I said no to budget requests from state officials so many times that when I was Secretary, I had a big red sign printed that said no. And I put it on my desk, and people would have to stare at it when they asked for money from me. So as a fiscal conservative, I don't come to my support for foreign assistance lightly or with frivolous intention. So why do I support it? How can we convince the American people that foreign aid is not only a worthy budgetary expense, but vitally important to our interests? With massive budget cuts looming, the aid community is trying to build broad American support for foreign assistance, and yet we often seem unconvincing. Some elements of the development community even think that it is slightly unclean or unethical to defend our vital national interests. If we are to construct a lasting bipartisan constituency to support foreign aid, you know this has been one of my passions for some time, we must understand and use the language and values that resonate throughout the country, particularly in the heartland. And we have not done that, I don't think. We in the aid community have long argued that aid programs represent less than 1%, as Congresswoman Lowe, and as I've said over and over and over again for 15 years. It was Julia Taft, actually, when she was president of Interaction, that showed that we did polling when I was Vice President of World Vision. And we did this polling through Interaction, and it showed that. And so we've said this over the years. Our attempt to correct this misimpression is understandable, even commendable, but it is at best a defensive strategy. Foreign aid is a target because it is foreign aid, not because of its perceived proportion of the federal budget. In fact, I suspect that the American public attributes an inaccurately high percentage of the federal budget to foreign aid precisely because they don't like it very much, and because they are ignorant of, not because they are ignorant of the statistics. What then is our core message to American voters and their representatives? What do we get out of international development programs that is good for America? I believed before 9/11 and that the more allies America has and the fewer enemies the better we can protect our vital national interests around the world. I am convinced of this even now. We live in an interconnected and integrated world, a trite but true observation of the evolving international order. This was made frighteningly clear to us on 9/11, and yet we are quick to forget and shrink back to our traditional defensive national security posture. In today's world, it is not enough just to deter our enemies with our overwhelming military power, which I support. We need lasting allies based on genuine partnerships, development alliances around the world that are built just as people build relationships. We engage based on shared vision. We demonstrate respect toward one another. We provide assistance to confront common challenges through deeds as well as words. I believe in American exceptionalism, that the 20th century has been an American century, good for Americans and good for the world. The new international order that we created on the ruins of the most disastrous war in world history, World War II, has reduced poverty more dramatically, increased literacy, reduced child mortality and maternal mortality, increased food security, and created a better life for a much greater portion of the world's population than at any point in the last 5,000 years of human history. And that is demonstrable from empirical data from economists. It's not just rhetoric. We need to present our aid program as a projection of American humanitarian, educational, and economic power around the world that connects the institutions of American life, public, private, educational, and charitable, with those of other countries. When we do this, we cement alliances and build support for an international system that protects our national interests, but those of other people around the world as well. When our interests are threatened, as they were in 9/11, the international system and our allies will be there to support us. Let me make 5 enlightened self-interest arguments for a foreign aid program. First, good aid makes good trade. Our aid programs are building a rule-based international economic order, which is the best environment for American businesses to compete abroad. USAID's economic growth programs in developing countries work in removing barriers to entrepreneurs and inventors starting new businesses through our Doing Business Reform agenda, which I helped start. And competitiveness reforms. Remember, we brought Michael Porter to AID to lecture the staff, and we did a videotape of him, and I made everybody we took copies to all of the missions, and we made everybody look at them, even the janitors. And then the competitiveness reforms, which encourage investment by American businesses by creating a transparent, rule-based environment. Our trade capacity building programs facilitate exports from developing countries to the United States. USAID's technical assistance effort to combat money laundering and the illegal narcotics trade while protecting intellectual property rights, stamping out corruption, creating commercial legal codes, extending the internet to unconnected countries, creating property rights for the poor, and strengthening the court systems are building this rule-based international system. It will take generations to achieve this fully, but impressive progress has been made. Did a calculation the other day. 8 countries that were once major recipients of U.S. aid, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, and Mexico, which have either graduated from foreign assistance or will shortly, imported $297 billion worth of U.S. goods and services last year. This was a quarter of all of our exports. Second, failed states are a principal threat to the United States national security, and our aid programs are the best way to put them back together again. Why did Al-Qaeda have its home in Somalia, Sudan, and Afghanistan? They were all failed states, easily exploited by Osama bin Laden and his allies. Poverty does not cause terrorism, but failed states often mutate into magnets for terrorist networks. Working to prevent states from failing through our development programs is a great deal less expensive in the long run, in taxpayer dollars and the lives of American troops than picking up the pieces after the countries have been taken over by criminal syndicates or terrorists. Third, our disaster relief, international health, and education programs, which Congresswoman Lowy actually helped design, particularly the education programs, shape the image of the United States abroad and represent our most powerful tool of public diplomacy. Public opinion polling in developing countries, in Indonesia and Pakistan, in the Arab countries and sub-Saharan, tell us that when people know about our aid programs, our favorability ratings rise, and quite substantially. According to a Pew Foundation report, America enjoyed poll ratings between 70 and 90% in many favorability ratings in many African countries after President Bush increased aid with the support of the U.S. Congress to Africa by nearly six-fold through PEPFAR, the Malaria Initiative, the MCC, trade capacity building, and education programs. It is much easier for a foreign leader to work with us on counterterrorism if voters in their countries view the United States as a positive force. That is why we undertook the branding campaign to connect our aid programs directly to the American people, which Congresswoman Lowy again mentioned. Fourth, our USAID's international health programs are building a worldwide infrastructure to combat and confront communicable disease. While we are all very proud, and me in particular, as Americans, of our international health programs from a purely humanitarian perspective, they save millions of people's lives. What often escapes our notice is that these same programs have built a worldwide pandemic response infrastructure which will be our and our allies in the developing world's first line of defense when we face future pandemics, which epidemiologists tell us are inevitable. It was largely the USAID-supported health infrastructure that many health contractors and NGOs here tonight manage that provided supply chain management for 25 million doses of vaccine for 60 countries and assisted with immunization, communication, laboratory strengthening, primary care, and community mobilization in confronting the avian flu epidemic of 2009. Now, we got off lightly because the virus did not mutate. If it had mutated, we could have had a repetition of 1918. John Barry says in his book, The Great Influenza, 2 million Americans died in 1918 in that pandemic. But he says that we never counted the number of people who died in the developing world. And his estimate is 90 million people died in 1918 in that pandemic. We could have had the same thing repeat itself. What stands between us and those pandemics is our aid infrastructure. And I might add, CDC was told in 2009, if this pandemic gets out of control, we're calling all of CDC back because your primary responsibility is not in the third world, it's in the United States. We are not going to be called back because our primary duty is in the developing world. And we are that first line of defense. Fifth, AID's democracy and good governance programs are helping newly emerging democracies to build strong institutions, protect human rights, build civil society, and ensure accountability. America would be safer and have more friends and allies in a world of mature democracies. These arguments, which are by no means comprehensive, appeal to the enlightened self-interest of the American people. Any conservative will tell you that foreign policy and national defense are constitutionally mandated functions of the United States government. Some even argue that these should be the only functions, I would not go that far, of the federal government. There are conservative friends of mine who contend that we should privatize foreign aid, that the private sector does it better than the public sector. Foreign aid is essential to the defense of the homeland, given the structure of the evolving world order where national boundaries and two great oceans are no longer giving us much protection. National defense in the 21st century cannot be delegated to the states, nor can it be left to the private sector. It is a fact that financial flows to the developing world from the developed world are now largely private in nature. Trade and investment, remittances, corporate philanthropy, private foundations, charitable contributions to NGOs are now the dominant form of aid to the third world. However, official development assistance is still critical for our national security, even if it's not the source of the bulk of aid. Private foreign aid cannot be directed toward the broader strategic objectives of U.S. policy. Private aid tends to focus on social services and relatively stable countries. Private foreign aid does not focus on promoting democracy and governance, rescuing failed states, advancing economic reforms, and on trade. We cannot, for example, tell private aid donors to direct their resources to democracy building in the Arab Spring countries. These kinds of programs are nearly all funded by the public sector and yet are an essential part of our foreign policy. However, public and private aid can and should work together to achieve greater results than the sum of their individual parts. One thing I am most proud of that both Barbara and Nita mentioned this evening, of course, is the Global Development Alliance. Chevron is here tonight, and I want to pay tribute because they funded one of the earliest Global Development Alliances in Angola with 4 NGOs and AID. And it was this very successful GDA in Angola which helped accelerate the acceptance of the program within the agency. Bob Hellyer, who was the mission director, tells an amusing story that a lot of mission directors are saying, it's just kind of rhetoric. It's not going to amount to much, until he announced how much money Chevron had put into it. I think it was $15 million, as I recall. We put $15 million. And there was no earmarks, no OMB, micromanagement, okay? No offense, Congressman, but not 12 congressional committees telling us how to spend all the money. And he said, we can spend the money just working with Chevron, their money. And that is what caused a huge an enthusiastic embrace of the idea among the mission directors. So thank you very much, Chevron, for doing that. Many conservative critics of foreign aid are unaware of the profound changes in AID over the last decade. In fact, even in Washington, there is little comprehension of the, unless you travel. If you travel, you understand, of the fine work the contractors, universities, and NGOs represented here tonight do in developing countries implementing USAID's programs, which produce results with high levels of accountability and the use of best practices in program design. Now, in 2005, I took Rush Limbaugh to Afghanistan to see USAID's programs there. And I did take a little heat from some of you and some of the career people who were not necessarily fans of Rush. But when Rush returned home, by the way, in private, he's a very charming man. Maybe you may not believe that, but he is. He was astonished by the programs. He didn't know anything about what we did. You know what he did when he came back? We monitored his programs. Every night, he talked about those programs. He endorsed them. He supported them. He said they're as important as our men and women in uniform. For a conservative audience, one endorsement of our aid work by an influential figure such as Rush Limbaugh is worth 1,000 endorsements from a Hollywood actor or an entertainer. To be fair, the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition over the past month has orchestrated articles and public statements from a number of Republicans in support of foreign aid. George W. Bush wrote a wonderful article for the Wall Street Journal. Paul Wolfowitz, Senator Marco Rubio, and former Senator Phil Graham have spoken out. These are laudable and important statements, but what effort have we made to reach beyond the Beltway to the American voters? We must engage popular conservative opinion leaders. We don't have to argue with them or explain. We need to take them to the field. I did not explain to Rush before he left what we did. You just take them out, they see it, and the program explains itself. If you try to convince people verbally, you will lose. If you take them to the projects, they will be convinced. One of the most powerful features of the Global Development Alliance is that it created a new set of American partner organizations, such as the American Business Community, to help carry the message of why foreign assistance is so important in protecting America's vital national interests in a dangerous, predictable, and unstable world. The wise stewardship of American influence requires that we build alliances with nations and people around the world. This is in our enlightened self-interest. A strong national defense will deter the enemies that we can see on the horizon. That's what defense planning is about. But as was the case on 9/11, we won't always see the next elusive threat before it strikes us. Let me close this evening with another Sudan story. After the independence ceremony in July, I went up to my friend Salva Kiir to congratulate him on his nation's tremendous achievement. His reply struck me. "We should congratulate you, Andrew." I was taken aback, because many of us would have died had it not been for USAID during this terrible war. That's what he actually said. "You saved us and made this day possible." And that, my friends, is not a bad endorsement of our foreign aid program from someone who knows by his own personal experience its enormous power. Humanitarian and development assistance with a long-term perspective is one of the shrewdest investments the United States can make in its longer-term role in the world. This is something the American people can and will support if we as a community and our political leaders can get the message out across the country. Thank you for this honor tonight. Thank you for meeting my friends. Thank you for being here.
This concludes our program. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.